Hello, Dawn Moore at Allegiance Title Company. The hot topic this week has involved the discussion of non-refundable earnest money. I have been requested by several people to review some language and/or help come up with some language that would make the earnest money non-refundable to the buyer. On top of that question, they asked further that the language be drafted to allow the title company to release the earnest money without further signature of the buyer. When I'm asked this question, I have to probe a little bit deeper. I really want to know what the seller is asking for. Is the seller really asking for the buyer to waive certain contingencies under the contract? Meaning, is the earnest money non-refundable if the buyer doesn't get their loan for any reason? Or is the earnest money non-refundable if there is a defect in the title or survey? Or is the earnest money non-refundable for any reason? Well, what if the seller doesn't close? If the seller's in default, is the earnest money non-refundable? Perhaps the language better deals with waiver of specific contingencies or all contingencies. Then, if the buyer fails to close because of a contingency that they've otherwise waived, the seller may have remedies under the contract that's in addition to the earnest money. That is, suit for damages. However, if the seller is willing to settle for the earnest money, you could put in special provisions something to the effect that says, notwithstanding anything contained in the contract to the contrary, the earnest money is non-refundable to the buyer for any reason other than seller's default. That way you've taken care of every contingency under the contract except for seller's default. The second part of the question that's discussed when we talk non-refundable is whether a title company will be able to release the earnest money without further signature of the buyer. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side you're on, the title company is to be the neutral party. Therefore, they owe a fiduciary duty to both sides of the transaction. If there is a reason for why an earnest money will be released to one party over the other, the title company must remain neutral and not take sides. They can't decide if that reason exists or doesn't exist. If the buyer and seller are in dispute as to that reason existing, then the title company is there to act as the neutral party. They cannot choose sides. Unfortunately, I am the beneficiary of experiencing failure to meet fiduciary duty. A few years ago, we released earnest money to a seller after a 3-year hiatus on a contract. The buyers and sellers had disappeared for 3 years. The sellers came back and said, we want the earnest money, and from evidence in the contract, we could tell that the buyer had defaulted under the contract, all the evidence that we had. However, we decided, okay, we'll release the earnest money, but we'll also protect ourselves and get an indemnity from the seller. The seller indemnified us, stating that if the buyer did in fact show back up and request a refund of the earnest money, that the seller would indemnify us and pay back the earnest money, or release the earnest money to the buyer. As the case may be, the buyer did show up. But the buyer didn't sue for the earnest money. The buyer sued the title company for failure to abide by its fiduciary duty. When I sought indemnification under the indemnity agreement, the seller said no, he wasn't indemnifying me for failure to meet my fiduciary duty. He only was indemnifying me if the buyer sought a suit for the earnest money. Needless to say, we had to settle that transaction, and we lost money for releasing earnest money that was clear it was due to a seller, but our fiduciary duty was to act as a neutral party. Release of earnest money has always been a frustrating topic, but rarely is a seller or buyer holding on the earnest money just to be a jerk. Most times they each believe they have a legitimate competing claim to the earnest money. In that rare instance, however, if one of them is just being a jerk, my suggestion to you is that you highlight paragraph 18D of the contract, which states that if any party wrongfully fails or refuses to sign a release acceptable to the title company, then that party may be liable for the earnest money plus 3 times the earnest money plus attorney's fees plus court costs. Once that is pointed out to the jerk, so to speak, they are more likely to sign a release of contract and let the seller move on to selling his property. Thank you. I hope this has been of help to you. I hope this helps you understand why the title company takes the neutral position and holds the earnest money when there's a dispute. Please come see us at Allegiance Title. We want to be your resource for results. So thank you for your support.